All right, so I want to start by getting some opinions from you all. We're going to take a couple minutes and do this, about what you think the most important core task, role, thing that we do that is the most core to all of us. So it can't be something that just you do, like if you're a maintenance technician, okay, well, remember to clean the drain really well. I mean, that's a big one. But it has to be something that applies to pretty much everybody. So think about it. Give me some suggestions. I'm going to write them up here on the board because they'll all be good, I'm sure.
You talking about something that we do to an AC?
Something that you do in general, in terms of something that you do. Anything that you do in general, in terms of, okay, maybe I didn't clarify this. Let's back up. Work-related, anything you do at Kalos, something you do at Kalos, a function that we perform at Kalos that is the most important thing. Because I think it's fairly important that we should know what the most important thing is, right? And at the end, I'm going to give you my opinion, and then I'm going to talk about it. But I want to know your opinion, too, because that's just as important. Go ahead. All right, let's get started. Josh.
Valuing the customer.
Okay, valuing the customer.
Communicating with the customer.
Valuing plus communicating with customer. My R's don't look like R's. Okay, I'm just going to tell you right off the bat. Okay, most of my letters don't actually look like the English language. All right. Keep going. Who else? Come on. Let's go.
Team camaraderie.
Oh boy. You're just trying to make me spell words I don't know how to spell. All right. We're going to do this here. I know how to spell team. Camaraderie. See, if you kind of mangle them up enough in there, then you can't really tell whether it's wrong or not.
The comments will correct you on YouTube. Don't worry.
I'm sure they will. I'm sure they will. Thank you, YouTube.
YouTube's got you.
Yeah, appreciate that. All right, what else?
Great service.
Oh, okay, here we go. Simply great service. Where did you learn that one from? All right. That's good. That's really good, Jake. Thank you.
Getting approval from the customer, price approval from the customer.
Oh, price approval. That is a number one. Okay. All right. All right. What else?
Giving the customer every option.
Okay. So we'll say providing options.
We provide solutions.
You already had one, Josh.
We provide solutions.
Man, creativity also very important. All right. Providing solutions. I would say that's a pretty good one. It's pretty vague, but it's going to have to be pretty vague if it's going to apply to everybody, right?
We'll just say always learning, always asking the customer hey, is there anything we could do better?
Okay.
I always say it at the end.
Jake already had one.
I always say it at the end of my installs when I said, "Is there anything we could do better?" And they're like, "Okay, get out of here before you say something."
All right. And that's just when they start to answer that question, you go blah, 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 blah.
All right, well, see ya.
That's not funny. All right. Anything else?
I didn't say learning.
That's kind of what he said. That is what he said. Isn't that what you kind of said?
Learning in general.
Yeah.
Learn every day.
Okay, so we'll just say learning from the customer. There. Huh? No. All right. What else? Anything? No?
Just tell us.
Working hard is not important.
Working hard is not important. We could put it in there. Work ethic. Right, but that's not really a thing that you do. Work ethic isn't really a thing that you do, but it's a broad thing that does matter. You have to want to work, So, all right. I think the first one is a good one, and it sort of and the valuing part kind of gets to what I'm going to talk about next. But in terms of what function we can actually perform, what thing can we do that makes a big difference in terms of the outcomes versus not doing it. So just a single kind of thought. And initially when I thought about this, I didn't have something clear. But then a couple things over the weekend came up that just reminded me again of what it is. And I was actually thinking about different people who are good at their jobs here. And most of you are good at your jobs, but people who are particularly good at what they do, they have these things. So I'm going to put check marks beside some of the things that this applies to. So it applies to valuing and communicating with the customer. It applies to simply great service. It applies to price approval. It applies to providing all options to the customer. It applies to providing services. It applies to learning from the customer. Work ethic, but you know that one is bothering you. Just having to sit here is bothering Bert. Vacation. There we go.
Yes.
Yeah. All right. There we go. That doesn't look like vacation. All right. So, and I thought that this would happen. I didn't know for sure, but I thought that this would happen. I thought that the ones that you would come up with all were kind of nested into this broader thing. And I'm gonna go ahead and just put it over here real quick so that it's sitting by itself. So we're going to call it customer communication, but specifically follow-up. We're gonna stick with follow-up because I think follow-up is a little bit more specific. When you hear follow-up, that sounds a little bit more like a specific thing you have to do, whereas everybody kind of feels like they're good at communication, right? Sure, I communicated. But follow-up, that's kind of, like that's kind of specific. It's kind of like you did something and now, or you're going to do something, or you said you'd do something, and now you got to follow up on that. And
Are you saying follow up or follow through?
let's do both. Follow up and follow through. Jesse likes follow through better. Okay, that's fine.
I'm not, well, one's communication and one's
Try to overcomplicate it.
Say it again.
I was just saying, like, is
I
this
would
like
say
a
that
follow-up
one's
phone
work
call?
ethic, and
Or
the
is
other
this
one is
like
about vacation.
It's the idea
following up
that,
on what you said you
okay,
would do?
so let's give an example. So if the customer says something to you,
Wow.
okay, if the customer says something to you, and there's some ambiguity about what they're saying, about what they're wanting.
What does the ambiguity mean?
Ambiguity means there's lack of clarity. So you don't have complete clarity on what it is that they're saying. Follow-up is to say, I just want to make sure that I'm understanding exactly what you're saying here. ...
Okay, I was just following up with you, making sure I understood.
Very good. Well done. So that requires an extra step. It's not just because communication often, here's the problem with just saying customer communication. Often that means that you've said what you have to say. I communicated, right? But does that mean that they understood what you communicated? No, not necessarily. And even more importantly, it's much more about us understanding what the customer is saying than them understanding what we're saying. In fact, you could probably get away in this trade with almost never having the customer understand what you're talking about, so long as you understand what they're talking about. Anybody dispute that?
So long as you confirm that you understand that.
What they're talking about, right, which is the whole follow-up part, right? Some of the best technicians, some of the best salespeople, some of the best managers in terms of resolving conflict are all about listening and follow-up, but not about trying to be understood. That war within us where we want to, I mean, this you start with this when you're a little kid, like, and you can't talk, and you're like trying to mutter words and people aren't understanding you, and you have to battle to be understood. Especially when there's 10 of you, living in a house, something like that, or 12 in Jesse's case. You have to battle to be understood. So we always have, for our whole lives, we place a value on being understood, but in terms of business, it's far more important to understand and to have that clarity that you are understanding, right?
You uncomfortable with this meeting, sir?
No, he's falling up with the customer. Did you see that? Yeah, good. Or the customer's falling up with him. One or the other. And how this looks in terms of, because I was thinking about this in terms of our new mechanic, Tim. Has anybody met our new mechanic, Tim? Mm-hmm. Everybody's met our new mechanic, Tim, pretty much, okay?
Yeah.
Does anybody dislike Tim?
No.
Because he's not dislikable,
Not
right?
yet.
And Tim, when you say something to him, he's just listening to you. Now, it's kind of like this, so you're not always quite sure, but he's just listening. He's not saying a bunch of words back at you, and he's not trying to convince you of anything, right? Have any of you ever worked with a mechanic who the minute that you say something, they start rattling off all they know about everything? I never have, but I'm just wondering if some of you have. So, the point is that what he's really good at is just hearing you and then getting to work, not trying to convince you of how much he knows. Right? There's no trying to convince you of what a genius he is. There's no trying to be the smartest man in the room. That is an impulse that a lot of us have, certainly not me, but a lot of other people have. No, it's a real liability for me as a technician, for sure, that I always wanted to explain things to the customer. Well, the customer largely doesn't care how air conditioners work. They mostly just want to know, how long is it going to take, how much is it going to cost, and is this guy going to rip me off? Is this guy lying to me? That's mostly what it is. And the way to establish that is to hear for those cues when they're ready for that communication, and then to answer those questions that they have, right? The time has come that you have a failed contactor and an evaporator coil that needs cleaned or whatever, and now comes the time to discuss what that means in the simplest language possible, tell them what the price is, and then, do you have any questions about that? Yeah, actually I do, da-da-da, 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 great. And now you just answer questions that they have in as simple as possible until they no longer have any questions. That's what follow-up looks like within a conversation, right? You're just waiting for them, and you're answering their questions. Make sense? I think we overcomplicate most of this stuff, which is why often we see, our experience is, that a lot of times people who are 3 to 8 years in the trade actually can be most effective. Now that's not always true, and I'm not going to get lots of disputes about that. But in residential, that seems to be kind of the sweet spot for us. And I think what happens there is that you still are in touch with the fact that you don't know a lot of stuff. And so you're not always trying to look like a superstar. You're not talking too much as much. And you're focused more on just the performance of the task. And your ears are a little more open because you don't want to make a mistake. As soon as your ears start to close down and you think you already know, it doesn't matter how good of a technician you are. The customer doesn't perceive that you're caring for their best interest because they notice that you're not listening and you're just more interested in talking. That makes sense? So that's in the context of a conversation. But let's talk about it in terms of some other things. When we tell a customer they're going to get a particular thing, and then the installers show up and they don't have the particular thing that we told the customer that they would get, what does that look like? It looks like lack of follow-up. Looks like lack of follow-through, right? Follow-up in that it's not necessarily follow-up with the customer specifically, but it's follow-up on the communication that was had with the customer to make sure that they get what they're supposed to have, right? Another one would be, you have a communication with the customer about a part, and you tell Tim, make sure to get on this, and then you let it go because you figure, well, it's Tim's job to do that, right? It's Tim's job to follow up. But is it just Tim's job to follow up? No, it isn't. It's our job to make sure that Tim follows up. And that's unfortunate, right? Because ideally, everybody would just always exactly do their job properly. But the problem is, you know the conversation you had with that customer. You know whether that customer was agitated, irritated. You know the tone of the conversation. And you know the ones that aren't going to care if it's a week from now, and the ones that are going to care if they're not followed up within the next 2 hours. And so it becomes imperative in terms of follow-up and follow-through for you to irritate Tim, regardless of what snarky comments he levies at you, not that he would ever do that, until he gets that answer. And even if you have to be the one to call the customer, making sure that customer gets followed through with. And because it's always better in terms of the customer's experience if they're communicated with by the technician who is at their house. Right? It doesn't always feel that way. Sometimes it feels like, oh, it'd be better if it was a manager. It'd be better if it was... That's an escalation. So there's a time for that. But largely, it's better in the customer's perception if that follow-up comes from the person who they communicated with. So they can ask follow-up questions, whatever the case may be. Right? Does everybody get that? It's not a criticism, because I understand that in the job requirements list of things, that's not on the list for you. On the list for you is not to follow up with a customer and make sure that they got their part, or they got their filter dropped, or they got whatever. I understand that. But in terms of the overarching mission, in terms of the mission is communicate with the customer, follow up, and we'll also add follow through with that customer to make sure that they've gotten what the experience that you communicated with them. Anybody have any examples of that? Bert, do you have any examples?
Yeah, that happens a lot. Yeah.
That's not an example.
Follow-up happens a lot, or the lack thereof?
Well, yeah, that problem does happen a lot, the lack of follow-up. You usually hear it on the back end when a customer's called in, like, hey, what's going on here?
Right.
Yeah.
And that customer's experience is degraded because of that. They just are. Now, it's not just your responsibility. It's not just Tim's responsibility. It's not just Jesse's responsibility or Shonda's or my responsibility. It's all of our responsibility. And if all of us guard this as though it is the most important thing that we do, then it will happen. So is it more important than cleaning drain lines? Well, okay, it's close. But it's something that we can all do. It's something that we can all guard. So if that isn't happening, we all have to jump on it and make sure that it's happening. All of us. And for me, as much as anyone, I do not enjoy customer follow-up. It is not something that is natural and never has been, because I just want to get on to the next problem to solve. A lot of us are motivated by solving problems. That's a technician trait. The next puzzle, the next thing, that's fun, right? It's not fun to have a grouchy customer following up because they didn't get the right filter, or because whatever. Because they looked up online and saw that a capacitor costs 1/10 of what we charge for it on Amazon. You know, those sorts of follow-ups are not fun. But they are necessary because it does require communication. Some of these conversations are fairly complicated. But you don't lead with those conversations. You wait until the customer brings it up, and then you respond in the most simple way possible. Well-trained responses. Right? Well-drilled responses. We don't get good at particular things unless we do them. This is a key point. And if we avoid customer communication and we avoid customer follow-up, then that's the reason you're not good at it, frankly. If you do it more, it becomes more natural. If it becomes a standard drumbeat of what you do, regardless of whether or not it's something that comes naturally to you initially. All right, any questions about that? Anything you want to add to that? I think there are a lot of areas that this applies. It applies to sales, for sure. It applies to installers. It applies to management. It applies to Genesis, dispatch. It applies to the CSRs, for sure. It applies to them. Follow up, follow up, follow up. If you have in your head, I should probably follow up on that, or I wonder what happened to that, that's your trigger to follow up. Just go ahead and follow up. Even if it just means, all right, you know what, it's going to be quicker if I just call the customer and just check. Hey, just checking in on you. Did anybody give you a call back yet? I just want to make sure you're taken care of. No, they haven't. All right, let me get right on that. That makes them feel cared for. It makes them feel heard. It makes their issue feel important. And it is, because it is important to us. I mean, we don't want customers to be unhappy. I don't think any of us are okay with that at all. I know that of you, so I'm not even concerned about that part of it.